Man, you guys ever get some flour that just doesn't smell too good? And you think to yourself, well, that flour probably wasn't dried properly. And then you remember someone said, like, you gotta wait for the branch to snap. When you hear that snap, that's when it's perfect. But I'm here to tell you guys that that's probably BS. That branch snap is probably a myth. And that's probably why your flour is smelling like, hey, straight up basura. Trash. Damn! Now, in today's episode, we're going to break down the ideal temperature and RH when it comes to drying. This episode specifically on drying is video 1 of a 2-part episode that you guys can see on dry and cure, so definitely look out for the second episode. But it's super important to dry your flowers properly in the right environment with the right temps and RH so that your flowers don't go moldy or become overly dry and brittle and break into a million pieces when you do this with them. Now, you also don't want them to dry too fast or too slow because those factors can lead to uneven drying and you'll end up in the same troubles as I just mentioned. So today we're going to try to help you guys optimize the dry process and tell you guys I think the branch snap myth is a myth. And I want to hear what you guys think about that. So drop it in the comments down below and let me know what you think of that. Now before we break all that down, gotta shout out Ican Organics. The Ican Veg Pack and Flower Power is amazing stuff. Slow organic fertilizer for your plants. It's a really easy way to fertilize your plants and give them what they need. The Veg Pack has tons of organic ingredients and the Flower Pack also has some endomycorrhiza and some bacteria in there that's really beneficial for your girls. Now I use that alongside Recharge, and these 3 things are a killer combo. They literally bang. You can hit that discount code icanthc and snag a discount on that Recharge or on the Ican Organics Veg Pack and Flower Power. So give them a try today and snag a discount while you guys are at it. And I know a lot of you guys love growing organic because it just tastes a whole lot better. But speaking of taste, let's get into today's episode because that dry can break your entire taste and mess everything up. Now straight off the bat, we gotta get into the optimal temperature and RH when it comes to drying and curing. I don't want you guys to say, oh, you could just tell us the optimal RH and let us know what it is and we can go on with life. Oh yeah, I can. That's why I'm letting you guys know up front, but there are a few things you guys will need to tweak to achieve these things and we'll get on to in a bit. The ideal parameters for drying your flowers according to a systematic review published in Molecules in 2022 is a temperature of 18 to 21 degrees Celsius. That's about 65 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and about 50 to 55% relative humidity. Typically, once your flowers hit a moisture content of about 8 to 10%, you can jar them up for cure. Now, depending on the initial moisture content of your flowers, whether they're really full of water because you watered all the way up until chop, or they're a little bit dry because of your RH and you cut back on that water, may determine whether you opt for wet trim or dry trim, your environments and all that. And I'm not here to slate wet trim or dry trim. I'm here to break down everything for you guys to make the best decision for you. But all these things can affect your drying time, and in those circumstances, your drying time can be anywhere from 5 days to even 2 weeks or more. But again, it all depends on various factors. Now that we got the optimal temps and RH out of the way, let's run through a few things that you guys may need to achieve that optimal RH or temp. Because when I lived out in the Caribbean, it was a completely different environment to where I'm at now in Colorado, and the drying and curing process was completely different. So some of the things I needed then, I did not need now, and some of the things I need now, I did not need then. And depending on where you're at, some of these things may come in clutch for you. So first off, an air conditioner. When I was out in the Caribbean, this was a big one for me. I really needed an AC unit to keep that drying room at the correct temp. I also used a lot of fans. Those fans can really direct airflow in the drying room. Just remember, you want to have airflow both vertical and horizontal, but avoid blowing air directly on your flower. You literally don't want to blow the terps off the pants, guys. But all jokes aside, if you keep your fans directly on your flowers, that can cause them to become overly dry. Now, drying racks can be useful in some circumstances for some growers, but me personally, I was not a big fan of them. I prefer to hang my flowers, and that's an alternative a lot of people go for. You can either use drying racks or you can hang your flowers. Hanging, in my eyes, gives a more even dry and avoids the risk that drying racks have when you set your flowers down on that and it starts to pancake and get really flat. You gotta turn them ever so often to avoid that. Now, to bring that RH relative humidity up or down, you're gonna need a humidifier or a dehumidifier. When I was out in the Caribbean, I had a massive dehumidifier and it worked really great. It sucked a lot of moisture out of that air, and a lot of people are familiar with dehumidifiers, but one thing to note is that if you're using those small little mini dehumidifiers with the small things that you drain every so often, you need to have it in a sealed environment, like a completely sealed tent, really sealed off. Even your carbon filters and your fans can be working against you if you got a really small one. So sometimes it's just better to get one of those bigger ones. And you can set it outside your grow tent, and that'll really help everything out. Dehumidifiers remove a lot of excess moisture from the drying room. On the flip side, a humidifier raises that relative humidity to an ideal range for your flowers. Where I'm at right now, it's always super dry. Oh guys, before I forget, I gotta let you guys know it's always Diesel Dog and the Ican VIP Bean Club is popping because we got tons of packs of fire genetics going out to all VIPs, so you guys better join up. And don't forget, like I mentioned before, Patreon took down the old page, so make sure you guys are joined up with the new page so you guys get in for that next drop. I don't want you guys to miss out. Link is in the description below. It's always pretty dry, so I need to get this RH up a little bit, and right now it's 48, usually it's about 40. And this right here is another tool that you guys will definitely need, a temperature and humidity gauge. These comes in really handy. You can place these in a few different areas around the drying room, around your drying tents, and that'll help you really zone in and dial in your RH and your temps, just so that you avoid running into any issues where you get that hay taste and all the hard work goes down the drain, guys. Now I mentioned carbon filters and stuff like that. Some people keep their carbon filters on and they dry in their grow tents, but they knock it down to 1. They knock it down to the lowest setting possible, so that way it does not dry too fast and suck any of that stuff out of there. And on that note, usually when you have a carbon filter set up, you may have some sort of negative air pressure. That's when the walls of your tent start to suck in a little bit, simply because air is being sucked in a lot faster than it's being blown out. Or is it the other way around? You guys get what I'm saying, negative air pressure. What you can do is when you're drying, flip that around and try to get some of that positive air pressure. Some growers actually add positive air pressure to their drying tents to prevent contaminants from entering into that room. Now for me, I like to keep my dry tent or my drying room in complete darkness. I'm talking pitch black, complete darkness. I don't like no light to be in there at all. So try not to dry in a lit room, or if you're drying in your grow tent, make sure those lights are unplugged so they don't kick on a timer and you don't realize and everything just goes to hell. Because light can degrade terpenes really quickly, and you don't want that to happen. Heat can also degrade your terps, and those lights can produce some level of heat in the tent. And speaking of keeping an eye on things, you really want to make sure that your temperature and humidity is consistent throughout the entire dry. A lot of people say a slow long dry is best, and I would have to agree with that, but sometimes you may not be able to achieve that slow long dry depending on your circumstances. If your RH is really low and you just can't get a long dry, then you may have to cut it at about 5 days, 6 days. But to slow things down as much as possible, a little hack that you guys can use when you guys are harvesting is keep as much plant material on your ladies as possible. Keep all the fan leaves on there, all the sugar leaves on there. Just cut that girl at its base and hang it upside down, just like that. Don't cut off individual branches and all those sorts of stuff. I know people do that, but if you're trying to slow things down, then that's a pro tip for you guys. But on the flip side, if you're trying to speed things up a little bit because you're in a really moist, super humid environment, your RH is like 60 or 70%, a lot higher than this, then what you guys can actually do is cut those branches down into smaller pieces. That'll help them dry a little bit more evenly. It all comes down to your environment. There's no one size fits all when it comes to the perfect dry, guys. And that's why the next thing we're going to talk about is so controversial, and that's the wet trim or dry trim. Which one is better for you guys? At what point do you trim your flowers, before or after you dry? Because that'll also affect your drying process. A lot of people say you should remove excess fan leaves before you dry because they'll prevent your flowers from drying properly. But again, if you're in a super dry place, maybe it's worth it to leave some of those on. They'll dry up anyway and you could just cut them off afterward. It will slow down your whole dry. And I mentioned watering already. If you water straight up to harvest, you're going to have a lot more water in your plants and in your leaves than if you did not. Now, a lot of people out there say wet trimming is crazy. Don't do that. Dry trim is the only answer. And for me, I prefer a dry trim, but it's all down to preference. But you may want to consider wet trimming if you live in a really humid climate, because that way you can at least maximize some of the air circulation to your flowers. And you don't have to do a really hard in-depth wet trim. You can just do a little bit of a light wet trim. A lot of people say the chlorophyll leaks over the flowers and affects your taste, but again, there's no scientific proof to this that I have stumbled upon in my research. If you guys have any, drop it down below. But I have noticed a little bit of a smell when you do it. It sort of goes away after a while. Sometimes it may not, I don't know. But you can also consider wet trimming if you got some fresh frozen flour that you want to make live bubble hash with that trim. That's a great way to do some of that. Now for most of you guys, I know you guys love dry trimming, and that really does help to preserve the flowers, leave you some really nice flowers, because those sugar leaves and fan leaves just curl around the flowers like what I call a bud blanket. And that keeps those flowers really nice and safe. Your buds are wrapped in a blanket, bro. And also if you're in a really dry place like I am, then dry trimming is definitely a plus. Perfect. Now in some commercial setups, I have seen big trim machines that actually prefer wet material as opposed to dry material, and I have seen some that prefer dry material as opposed to wet material. What am I doing with my hands right now? Pause. Now whether you opt for wet trimming or dry trimming, you'll need to trim your flowers to determine what works best for you. So figure it out. See what works for you based on your environment and see what works best. A little experimentation never hurt no one. Now if you don't dry your flowers properly, the biggest risk is that you can end up affecting everything. All your hard work goes down the drain because your flowers just smell and taste like trash. If it becomes moldy or unsafe to consume, you can't consume it anyway. And if it lacks that terp profile or is overly dry or harsh, it's not going to be pleasant and enjoyable. So all that said, I gave you guys the optimal temperature and RH when it comes to drying. Again, you want to aim for a temperature of around 18 degrees to 21 degrees Celsius. That's about 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit and about 50 to 55 degrees relative humidity. And that's for dry. There's certain factors that can affect how long or how slow your dry takes and what sort of tools you use in your drying room to achieve the optimal RH and temp level. So drop it in the comments down below and let me know what you guys got when it comes to drying and curing and what you guys do. Do you guys use a tent, a room? Do you guys use a humidifier or dehumidifier? Drying racks, hang dry? And most importantly, do you guys wet trim or dry trim? Because that's a controversial one. I really want to hear what you guys got to say for that one. And don't forget, check out iCan Organics and snag that recharge. Discount code icanthc works on all these stuff, and it'll save you guys a lot of cash. So smash that like, and we see you guys in the next one. Peace, fam.